Welcome back to Neurodiverse Christian Couples. I'm Stephanie.
I'm Dan.
And we are returning with two girls now married, returning from our long road trip to Nebraska and back, which means we've listened to some podcasts.
We did.
And we have some things to share if you've listened to some of our other podcasts. So what we want to talk about today, we want to cover a few things, hopefully. The four horsemen apocalypse, which is a Gottman term, but we really want to focus on contempt. Because one of the episodes that we were listening to, we were doing the Sermon on the Mount series still. It's a very long
Bible
series
Project.
from Bible Project. It's a very, very long series. And episode 10, which is in the show notes, talks about when does anger turn into murder, which by definition, like when does anger start to turn into sin? So we're going to really focus a lot more on contempt today. And so I think this episode has the possibility of equally offending men and women. And all neurotypes.
Well, we can only hope.
So, because I sure got some conviction, and I'll share like a personal conviction that actually came to me last night. I think as my brain was preparing for our talk today, I think the Holy Spirit said, "Hey, well, let's have a chat before you do that podcast."
I had a Charlie horse instead.
Yeah, you had Charlie horse
I got up
last
and had
night.
to walk around and drink pickle juice.
And I guess when you were awake, they're like, "Well, if you're going to be awake, let's chat. Let's talk about some things." Okay, so let's start with the four horsemen of the apocalypse. And so we have mentioned Gottman on the show before. We mainly did one on the relationship sound house. And so that is a previous episode we did. I want to say his name was McNulty. That was last year. So part of the how to go from the four horsemen to a relationship sound house was what we talked about. So these four horsemen, Dr. Gottman studied over years and decades, what are things that will lead to the end of a relationship? And again, contempt is one of those things. And we learned a new definition of contempt.
Yes.
So, do you remember the four horsemen of the apocalypse? Do you want us to go into them and review them, or what do you remember?
We could run down the four of them. There was criticism, contempt, there was defensiveness, and stonewalling.
Okay.
And I think last time we spent a lot of time on stonewalling.
Yes, we've talked about stonewalling and probably defensiveness some too. All right, so let's kind of take it back. So I'm going to run through what the horseman is. Then we'll talk about the antidotes. And if you've got any questions or want to give examples, and then we're trying to ease into the Bible Project on contempt. Because if you are a person who is guilty of contempt, you might think this is solely pointing the finger at you. But criticism, contempt, defensiveness, and stonewalling are all equally not good for your relationship. So we're going to start with being equal offenders. So criticism is verbally attacking someone's personality or character. And actually, I'm doing a class right now based on a book called The Critical Spirit by June Hunt and Healing from the Critical Spirit. So some of the things that she defines, like what is critical, critique, and when does something cross into criticism? So first, just let me start with, usually when people say, Dan, if someone said to you, Dan, you are such a critical thinker, is that a compliment or an insult?
I believe it's a compliment.
Right, but it has the word critical in it. So doesn't that mean it's something bad then? Like you're a critical thinker.
Only if you don't know what it means.
Okay, so if I'm saying to you, you are a critical thinker, which is usually what supposedly colleges are trying to get supposed to help you become a critical thinker. Yes. That's a whole nother discussion, maybe a rabbit trail. So if I'm saying to you, you're a critical thinker, what does being a critical thinker mean? As we could just start discussing the word.
Right, one that consumes the, let's put it in context. Let's make it by example. So maybe let's just take art. Maybe you're an art critic.
Okay.
And you're in a museum and you've got a piece of work in front of you. So if you're going to critique it, if you're going to create a criticism, a literary criticism of it, you might consider the art itself, the medium of which it's made, the time period of which it's made, what are the contemporaries, who was the artist, what was going on in his world, how does this work fit into the life of the artist's work? And now you can make an assessment, opinion, a judgment on the quality of the work from some perspective, right? Is this quality from craftsmanship, quality from creativity, quality from an interpretation of what was going on around them, right? There is some, and maybe you include all of those kinds of things, but you're creating an opinion based on the work in front of you and its context.
So there is some sort of analysis,
Certainly.
some sort of judgment.
Certainly.
And
on
so
the work.
On the work, right? So whether it's a food critic on what you're eating, a literary work, poetry, someone's research or dissertation.
Right.
So there's going
record review.
Okay, music. So there's going to be some kind of expressing an analysis based on the merit or fault of something.
Right.
And the goal of being a critical thinker is that there is some objectivity.
Right. Something about it is observable.
Okay, so that's where we do get the word critique from. Now, where it crosses into criticism is when I'm totally focusing on you, your personality, your character, apart from the behavior. Okay, so if I say to you, the tone that you used hurt me, is that a criticism?
No, that was a statement of observation.
Okay, so that's the teasing out of language here is if I say to you something you did, your behavior hurt me, that is not a criticism. So that's where we get into defensiveness, because defensiveness is perceived criticism and perceived attack. So the antidote to criticism, according to Gottman, is a gentle startup where I'm going to bring my complaint to you, my hurt to you, focused on my feelings, but based on your behavior and not your character, your intent, or your personality, or something about you was wrong, something about your behavior did that hurt me. So what's an example that I wrote down? Here's one. You always talk about yourself at dinner. So this is a criticism. You always talk about yourself at dinner with friends. You are so selfish and so egotistical. I cannot stand to go out to dinner with you. That's Dan. He's just so chatty.
You use the word always.
Right. And you're not supposed to use always or never. So the complaint would be a complaint that is not criticism, but I'm telling you what you did that hurt me. I was feeling left out at the dinner party tonight. I would like the space to join in conversations when the focus is solely on you. I don't feel connected to you, and I don't feel connected to the dinner party. So next time I would like for you to leave space for me in the dinner conversation. Right. So I still talked about maybe you were over talking at dinner, and I obviously chose one that's hyperbolic. That is not Dan. That is not Dan at all. It'd be like, you don't ever say anything at the dinner party. So the one is you, and you're selfish, you're egotistical. And one is, here's how me not having space made me feel, and here's what I would like, right? So that is a complaint with a solution and what they call a gentle startup.
We might also consider that notice and prefer.
Right. If you've heard our shows before, notice and prefer. I noticed at dinner, he seemed to overtalk. I prefer to have some space to be able to speak as well. All right. So that's the criticism. Now, criticism can start to take a stronger place in the relationship, what the Gottmans call contempt. And after we get through the 4 horsemen, we're going to spend a lot of time on contempt because we see this a lot in our coaching and in our classes from both genders and both neurotypes. Contempt moves to not only just attacking the person's personality or character, but attacking their sense of self, their self-worth, dignity, and it is with the intent to hurt or insult or demean. So the example that I got off of the Gottman paper, because I didn't want to use anything that anybody has said in a coaching. So this came from theirs. Contempt would say it's like taking criticism up to a notch. You forgot to unload the dishwasher again. Ugh, eye roll, sigh, it says. You are so lazy. I can't count on you for anything. All right. So not only did I just call you lazy, I now just said something about your worth. All right. So I've gone up a level from criticism to contempt. So their antidote is building a culture of appreciation and stating it differently. So this is their antidote statement. I understand, and you're probably going to maybe have a wilder moment here. I understand that you are busy. We're both busy, but I need to know that our agreements will have follow through or it will break trust in our relationship. Can you follow through on your agreements? So what was the difference there? All right. So what's your wilder connection?
Oh, I was just saying yes.
Oh, yes.
Question.
So with building the culture of appreciation, Wilder talks a lot about gratitude and joy building and that. So the Gottmans talk about if in your relationship it's gotten so negative and so toxic, the only thing you're thinking about on a daily basis is your partner's negative qualities, all the things you do wrong that hurt me, all the things that you do that I don't like about you. And I'm not trying to also be proactive and active in things I like about you, things you do bring to the table. Dan's a good cook. Let's say we argued all the time or Dan was bad with money. It's not that I'm saying, well, Dan being bad in money, I'm just going to make that equal that he's a good cook. We're not saying that. You're not like trying to equate it. You're not whitewashing it, and it's not toxic positivity, but to solely focus on all the things Dan does without saying, but Dan does most of the cooking, and I can appreciate the thing I can appreciate about Dan today is now I still can bring up my hurt. I still can bring up my complaint. But I can't just see you totally in that light of the all things negative.
And remember, we're contextually where we are. We're not just doing this arbitrarily, right? This is to stop criticism from turning into contempt, and at the same time is, according to Gottman's research, a way to stave off the disruption of the relationship.
Right.
So just staying in context here, this isn't arbitrary. We are doing this on purpose because even with all of those faults, let's say there's only one thing that I do well, and maybe that's close the door. The only thing I can do in the whole house is make sure the doors are closed. As sometimes pointless and replaceable.
Well, that's important to me.
Sometimes replaceable as that is, that one thing might be enough to keep you from falling into full contempt, even if the rest of the world in that situation is
right. And it's not toxic positivity. It's not whitewashing. It's not saying that you're not in pain. But again, if you focus, what you tend to focus on, that's all you're going to see when you're only focused on the negative. Now we're going to come back to contempt in a minute. So criticism and contempt start to ramp up. But then there's defensiveness can lead to stonewalling. So defensiveness is victimizing yourself to ward off perceived attack. It also is a blame shift, and it's trying to make it even. So Dan says to me in that way, it's probably with the dishwasher, it might be me or something, right? So you say to me, hey, you didn't follow through with what you said you were going to do, and it's really important to me. Well, you don't think you don't follow through? Well, let me tell you, sometimes you don't follow through. Let's talk about those. All right. So I just took what he just said, which was a legitimate complaint. I didn't do something to follow through, and I turned it on. Well, let me tell you where you don't follow through. And I'm going to probably shift it in such a way. I'm going to put the whole focus on him and all the things he doesn't do. And it's a self-protection mechanism. And then I'm going to turn myself into a victim. You don't appreciate anything I do. Why can't we talk about, I remembered the trash. I remembered your dry cleaning. I remember to take the dog to the vet. All you want to do is talk about the things I don't do. You never give me credit for the things I do. Yeah, that's usually part of the thing. All right. So with defensiveness, the antidote is, and I'm sure you're going to have a discussion on this, accepting the partner's perspective and offer an apology. That's called taking responsibility. Do you have a question about that? So accept your partner's perspective and offer an apology. Anything kind of going like, wait a minute, what about? Could you do that? Like I just said something, and you're like, okay, I'm gonna accept your perspective and just.
Oh, after your tirade just a minute ago? Well, you're allowed to have that tirade. That doesn't mean I have to believe it.
Well, one of the things that the Gottmans make, I thought you were going to come to this because we talk about intention and impact a lot.
Oh, yeah, that didn't jump into my head.
That if I'm accepting my spouse's perspective, what I did hurt them or what I did hurt their trust, that's their perspective, and I accept that. I do not have to accept if they put an intent on it. So if Dan says, you intentionally did not do something with the dishwasher, you loaded that dishwasher with the intent to tick me off, or you did it in the way I don't like because you want to make me mad.
You can't tell me what my motivation is.
Right. And when you start doing that, that's when you're going to get into these negative cycles. So Dan does not get to tell me what my motive was or what my intention was. He can say that what I did, it bothered him, it hurt him, it broke trust. But that's where you're really going to stick at someone, because now we're going to start arguing about the intention and motivation.
Which
And
is
that's
innately something that is unprovable.
right. So we always go back to thanks for the feedback. You may know you get to be in charge of your intent. The other person is in charge of the impact. So be careful when you're bringing up a complaint or bringing up a hurt, not to assign a motive or intent to it. All right. The last one is stonewalling. It is withdrawal to avoid conflict. And it is being done in such a way to convey disapproval, distance, and separation. It's not just that I'm walking away. It's like, I want you to know I'm walking away and I'm done. And the antidote is self-soothing, ask for a break, do something that is healthy, a distraction, calm yourself, then make sure you return to the discussion. So what do you want to say or ask about that? We were kind of talking about it before.
Well, I've already forgot what we talked about before. I think what's interesting is there's a lot of stuff stuck in there, right? You've got to figure out, well, what is calming to me, right? What is that thing? And it in most cases, it shouldn't be something that takes 3 days to do.
Right.
Right. In most cases, depending, there might be a topic that is really old and really big that doesn't need to be resurfaced in 15 minutes. But generally, most of the stuff that happens around the house, day-to-day stuff, and really can be, let's come back to that in 10 minutes. 90+% probably is in that kind of way. So what is that thing you're going to go do? Are you going to go listen to a song? Right. That's about 5 minutes. That's about the right time. You get there, all right. You're gonna go, I don't know, whatever it is. But there's got to be a thing that you do. There's got to be a known way that says, I am going to de-escalate and I am going to return to this conversation not in the same place I left it. Because when I enter back into that conversation, if the only thing I have done is re-ramped back up, I might as well have not left. Right? You've got to re-enter in that same place that you de-escalated when you got to, I'm there, listen to my song, I'm down, we're going to re-enter, not at the height that we were from whatever that escalation was. It is, that's important, because if you immediately ramp back up, you might,
right, you didn't stop anything.
You didn't stop anything. You're just going to have the same conversation.
You put a pause and you're going to hit play again.
Yes.
But so here's something that men say to me all the time. Well, when I want to stop talking about something, it's stonewalling. When she asks for a break and leaves the room, suddenly that's not stonewalling. Yes, that is correct. So stonewalling is a blockage to the relationship. It's a withdrawal from the relationship, and it's not soothing or doing what is necessary to come back to the relationship to repair or to finish the discussion. What is healthy, according to Gottman, according to our research, and according to things we do as well, is first of all, you have to advocate, I need a break. Then in that break, you need to do something that's polyvagal, something that's good for your vagus nerve. So that means no screens, don't comfort eat, don't get distracted in work, don't make a phone call. Something that is truly soothing to your nervous system. Maybe it's breathing, maybe it's music, maybe it's a shower, maybe it's a walk.
Maybe it's a practice of appreciation.
Maybe it's practice of appreciation. Go turn your relationship circuits on, because you are leaving. I'm taking a break for the purpose of regulating myself, calming myself, for the purpose of returning in a regulated state to continue the discussion. So if you ask for a break, so even if you do it nicely, guys, honey, I'm really feeling overwhelmed and I need to take a break. That was very nice. But if you leave and never come back, all you did was just nicely stonewall. That was just a more socially appropriate way to stonewall. But if you leave and you do not come back, and again, you're regulating yourself for the purpose of coming back. And so maybe depending on it's 15 minutes, it's 30 minutes. Can we do this after dinner? Maybe you need to walk and talk, so you maybe both can stay a little more regulated. So without doing that, these 4 horsemen are going to eventually end the relationship. So the Gottmans are mentioned in the Sermon on the Mount series. It's just like 2 sentences.
Yeah, and they don't even mention them by name. You'd have to know.
Right. You'd have to know what the 4 horsemen are. But that's what it is. It's Sermon on the Mount series, episode 10, from Bible Project. And so when they reference the 4 horsemen, that's what they are. What was intriguing to us was, so if Ephesians says, in your anger, do not sin, or be angry and sin not. So we know we can be angry and not sin. I can be angry and hurt at something you've done, and I am not in sin. But there is a space it crosses into sin. because the Jesus in the sermon is talking about that anger can be akin to murder.
Right.
So I know my notes. I've written my notes down. Let's talk about what you got from that about anger and murder and when does it cross to contempt? Because contempt is really the word they focus on just about the entire episode, is when your anger moves to contempt. That's when it's murder. What's the Star Wars thing about how fear turns to the dark side?
I don't think
remember.
I can do it.
Okay.
Anger turns to hate. Hate. I can't remember it.
Something turns you to the dark side.
Yes,
and that's
fear.
It starts with fear, gets you to the dark side. And that's kind of what was coming through my mind, is like, wow, so I can be angry, but if it seethes in me and I don't resolve that and it turns to contempt, contempt's going to turn me towards the dark side, or sin, let's just say. All right. So what's your kind of recollection of that?
So a couple of things were interesting. One is the progression. They made an analogy back, they made a link back to the Cain and Abel story of how Cain got so angry it caused him to rage, and that rage turned into killing his brother.
An actual murder.
But you back that up, and especially in the way they set this out, if you take it in reverse, it's calling somebody a moron, effectively, then telling them they're a fool, they're good for nothing, and then it goes into murder. So if you actually approach it in the opposite direction it's laid out in the sermon, it shows you how this built, kind of like the way we built the case for criticism into contempt. It's, you know what? You're just a moron. You don't know how to do whatever that is, right? There's no particular personal, I'm not demeaning your person. You're just not good at that thing, whatever that thing is. Then that builds into Raca. They call him a fool. You're good for nothing, effectively. That's where you start to get into that contempt idea. And at that point, you've started to declassify them as human. You said, you know what? That image of who you are, you bear the image of God. I don't think that's true anymore because you're good for nothing. And what was in that kind of idea, what you've done, and I say it very explicitly, is I have taken the opportunity to now assess you, and I am now judge and jury. And when you move it into the next statement, when that climaxes into anger and therefore murder in this case, I am now executioner as well. I have decided that, you know what, it's so bad you don't need to be here anymore. And that progression was extremely interesting, because if you don't catch something earlier, the harder and the longer you let it fester, metastasize, grow, the more you get comfortable with it, and the more you're and the harder it is to let that go. I mean, we've seen, oh, that was just a thing, I'll let that go, and you forget about it. But some things that hurt. I'm holding on to that I had to let that go. And it took a much longer, Tom, a much longer, even saying it once may not have been everything there was into letting that particular situation go. And those people, true forgiveness on that, it might have taken 3 or 4 times. Oh, you know, I really thought I was over that, but maybe I'm not. That kind of idea. And that progression was extremely interesting. And I'm not going to go into the whole thing. You can listen to the podcast for the guts on the reverse order of how the reciprocity of that goes. That's an exercise for the listener to go into that. But how just thinking that incapability can, if left
well, there might be some cases the person truly is incapable.
They might be, but it's how I think about their incapability that really takes an incapability into a less than into, you know what? I've decided you're just not really worth being here anymore. Right. And that great extreme clearly lays out how you get from one place to another. Because, you know, take the news. Some horrid thing happens. There's a horrid thing that shows up in the news every day. And you wonder, how does anybody ever get to that point? Well, there it is. It is what was once a small something or other was left unchecked, was left um, uncriticized, uncritical, lack of critical activity on my own behaviors, my own thinking process. And it turned into that. And that was extremely, um, that progression was because let's be real. I'm not the most gentle person in the car when
Mm-mm.
we're driving.
No.
Um,
Which I see calling someone an idiot is contempt. That's what it
no, and
says.
I didn't say they're an I said they're a moron.
Oh, well, it's the same thing,
No, they're incapable of driving.
right? But they said Raca can also go back to mora, which is
No, that's a
moron.
different word.
Right. Mora is
No,
moron.
you're mixing them up.
But they
Anyway,
said it's the same. They
no,
said Raca is fool, but mora and moron, that saying either about a person is the same thing. I'm just saying.
but you're mixing up
You're
my
trying to get out
progression.
of
You're
it.
mixing up my progression.
Okay, go back to your progression. I'm just saying.
But that simple statement, I'm driving to work, and that's why I don't drive to work anymore, um, is you can just start with something simple like that. I'm on the road. Somebody does whatever it is. I have no context to whatever's going on in their world. I don't know if they're in a hurry because they're trying to get home because their kid got sick. There's no context to why they're doing what they're doing. It's an immediate, you're just absolutely incapable of driving. So go home. Be out of my way. That thinking now is the origin of the end game of Jesus's statement in that section of those three pieces of progression. It could easily go from you're incapable of driving to, dang, why are you even here?
Get out of my way.
Right.
Should exist.
And then let's take the extreme, the road rage incident. You run into them, you do something really even more stupid, right? And then that turns into the evening news. It quits being a wow, how does that even happen to that's real. There is a real progression, and that doesn't mean it has to happen in a long period of time. You can go from moron to contempt to road rage 10 minutes. And it's well laid out. So I mean you have to be paying attention.